But I'd love to ask you about one of the negatives of AI, and that's as AI continues to develop, one of the biggest issues facing young media consumers is advanced deepfakes that are created to spread misinformation. The reasons behind the misinformation could range from just dumb, harmless fun to far more harmful motives. What do you say to audiences young and old that need to become more online literate on this specific subject?
Man, I think it goes in two directions. On one side, as educators, as teachers, we need to ensure that our students have much more developed critical thinking skills at younger ages, right? I got a science degree in undergrad, and they taught us so much about analyzing and discerning information and skepticism, right? I think at a younger age, students must be familiarized with this process of critical thinking. Now, on the other side, I think part of the responsibility is going to also rest on these massive billion-dollar platforms that are profiting so substantially to make sure that the things that they're being that creators are putting out on their platforms are truly digitally authenticated. And that's going to be an interesting process to see teased out. I've seen some companies developing AI tools that in some ways better than humans can detect whether or not something is actually made by AI or not. And I think another piece of that is NFTs, right? The non-fungible tokens we originally think of as these online art tokens were actually this next generation form of digital authentication on the blockchain. So that technology is still, I think, nascent. It obviously is stigmatized because of a lot of things that happened with the NFT space. But I can imagine a derivative of that technology actually being used to assist in digital authentication. But that is a huge part of this problem and a huge part of the solution.
Absolutely. I agree with what you said about it becoming kind of this stigmatized creative space, or not, so not creative space, technological space, just because of certain scammy things that went on with NFTs. But how do you think it's going to change tech education when these young minds have to be immediately thrust into a world where, hey, you need to absolutely make sure that this picture is authenticated, that it's a real news story that happened and not someone just trying to manipulate you online?
I think we're already seeing some of the effects of that. Like I could see, I mean, it's been interesting and somewhat sad to me that, recently I've seen a lot of very well-produced media content put out. And if it just looks too impossible to make or it's too high quality, people will be like, man, that's just AI, right? And so our skepticism is kind of, even among the young people, almost swung far in the opposite direction where we don't believe anyone's making anything anymore because the idea is that people can just lazily make stuff with AI today. Man, I think it's going to be a conundrum for these young people. But I think that, again, as long as they're remaining adaptable and learning those critical thinking skills, I think they can persevere through this time. I mean, we're all consuming content on the internet today, and, or most of us are. And, it's about finding those good sources too, right? Teaching those young people what is a trusted source of information, scientific journals. Some of the more boring stuff that isn't as clickbaity or isn't as easy to read can sometimes provide much more reliable and trustworthy sources of information.